We don't just tell the news here, sometimes we make it too. And tonight, GB News understands that the Metropolitan Police Federation chair has been suspended after an interview with us in which he expressed concerns about police officers, in his words, hesitating before dealing with ethnic minorities in case they are accused of racism. So the person who broke this story, GB News national reporter Charlie Peters, is with me now. Charlie, what's happened here? Give our viewers the backstory.
Well, on Monday, I went to a press conference hosted by Reform UK about a potential private prosecution they might bring in the case in the Manchester airport incident in late July. You'll remember that several alleged assailants attacked a couple of police officers, wounding some of them severely, it's said, but no action's been taken. And I wanted to take an understanding around the country about how widespread concerns were about this in policing in England and Wales. And I started off with the head of the largest federation, which is Rick Pryor in the Met. Now, he told me that as part of a wider conversation about concerns police officers have, that they are hesitating when dealing with ethnic minority Londoners because they fear vexatious, racist investigations into their work. They fear that their lives will be thrown aside and malicious investigations will disrupt their careers and their livelihoods. And he also said that the Met Police leadership were suffering from the racism of low expectations, that they were failing to call out bad behaviour by some Londoners because they didn't have the capacity to say that they weren't doing the right thing in certain incidents. He drew into one specific case to refer to that, the Croydon bus fare evasion case. Last year, a police officer stopped someone on a bus and asked to see their ticket. They refused, it escalated, he arrested her, but he was the one who went to court. He was convicted of assault by Tanit Cram, a magistrate down the road at Westminster Mags. That conviction was quashed last week. But in their statement about it, the Met simply said this was a controversial situation that divided opinion. For Met officers, this isn't that controversial. It was a scandal, and they needed their leadership to say that that behaviour from that woman was extremely poor. They didn't hear that. And that's what Rick said to me. I think we've got a clip we can play of him earlier this week on the television.
Let's hear him.
And the behaviour of certain individuals, it clearly falls below that of which society expects. I think it's incumbent on police leaders to support their officers who are charged with dealing with these type of incidents to come out and call out that behaviour. And I mean, the example of which I relate this to was the recent Croydon bus incident matter, where it was clear that the lady in question behaved poorly. It's a quite reasonable expectation of society that if you travel on transport, London transport, on the buses, the trains, you know that if you are asked to produce a valid ticket for travel, you show that ticket. Had that happened in this case, there would have been no incident. And so it was the behaviour of the lady in question that instigated the whole matter.
I have to say, Rick Pryor, as a journalist, has been a breath of fresh air. He speaks to reporters. He accurately reflects his members' concerns. He was elected in April to represent 30,000 officers in this city, and he feels as though this is not only their concern, but also their fear, that they're being hampered for doing their job. But last night, I was told that the Police Federation of England and Wales have suspended him as part of an investigation, saying that those comments that you just heard were discriminatory, and they risked the reputation of the Federation. Well, I speak to lots of other police chiefs around the country, those involved in federations, many of them, serving and former, told me last night and today that they were shocked and saddened by that move. They said it was perverse. And I even heard from a former criminal who told me, Sicarius McGrath, who was a gun runner and an extortionist, a gangland leader, he told me that Pryor is absolutely spot on. He said that many active gang members he speaks to now are deliberately using young black men to run drugs because they know that police officers will not want to stop them because of the fear that their lives will be ruined by a racism investigation.
Let's bring our panel in, Charlie. Dr. Richard Johnson, you're something of an expert in terms of racial politics, particularly. Should we be able to talk about this? Should Rick Pryor, as an elected police representative, feel free to express these concerns and not be suspended for it?
Well, I think he has a certain responsibility to ensure that what he's saying is an accurate reflection of policing in London. And based on what I had heard, I don't think that he really had provided enough evidence to us in that interview. You know, an anecdote cannot be evidence for a whole systematic approach. Now, if he has more evidence and he wants to bring in other people to back him up, and perhaps it sounds like those efforts might be building, then perhaps he might be able to make comments like that. But I think the way that he did it, pointing to one perhaps egregious episode to sort of make a more general claim, seemed to me somewhat irresponsible.
But if he's been elected by 30,000 police officers to represent their views, the chances are he knows what he's talking about.
Well, I mean, we know that elected officials can sometimes go a bit off-piste, and that what they say does not always capture the reality of the situation. I agree that it's important that someone in his position should be able to speak with a certain degree of candour, but I also think that given the sensitive nature of policing and the balance between ensuring that police are able to do their job, but also ensuring that the police don't abuse their position as well, I think that he needs to think a bit more carefully about how he backed up the claims that he was making.
Kelvin, let me come to you. I feel a bit sorry for this guy tonight, because all he's done is express a concern, which we could, and maybe saying that police officers hesitate before interacting with somebody of ethnic minority. That sometimes might be a good thing, surely, to just stop and think, am I acting appropriately here?
Well, first of all, I'd like to congratulate the GB News reporter on this, because this is what we know as a story that will not be reported by any other network. Sky News would literally rather pull the drawbridge up and forget it. So congratulations for that. On this issue, this is obviously a very delicate issue within London. If you are a white police officer and you have to arrest somebody of a different colour, right, you are going into not just a criminal area, you're going into a political area. And this happens, I suspect, in the heart of every white officer in London. They recognise that they're not going to get any support. So all that this guy Pryor was doing was actually taking an example, the Croydon one, as you describe it, Richard, could be a particularly egregious case in which the officer had his whole life and his career put on hold. The lady who made the allegation and led to the charge, she is swanning around Croydon today thinking, well, there was no problem to me in my life. And so I would like to see, somebody go and put together a top 10 of these, quotes, egregious cases, unquotes, and then say, this is the difficulty white officers face in London. And I bet you that even GB News, if you went out today and said, go around, officers were helpful to you, you could put together a really damaging case. And let's be honest, there is no love lost between the ethnic communities and the police, no matter what colour you are. And if you're white, this gives you a really good opportunity in the courts to shout racism against every single charge. I feel very, very sorry for anybody. And it's no wonder we can't find enough officers to police London, right? The reason you can't is there's a case going on right now. We can't go into it, but a guy was shot in a car, right? That guy is the police officer's on a murder charge, right? What happened? A whole load of officers then gave up being armed police officers. Yeah. They said, we are not going to do this. This is what happens now.
I think one of the most depressing parts of this story, Charlie, was when he was talking about the fact that young black boys are being recruited into crime because they can play the race card should they be arrested. There's nothing good to come out of that issue, Richard, is there? Like that's really dark assessment of what's going on the streets of the UK.
I mean, if it is true, it is a very dark assessment. And again, I just from where I'm sitting, I feel that I would.
Does it feel like it could be true, or that doesn't matter?
Well, I think there's really two sides on this issue, and as I said, there's a careful balance that has to be struck. I mean, as Kelvin said, there are many communities in London and all throughout the UK, particularly racial minorities, who lack confidence in policing, don't believe that policing is being conducted fairly. At the same time, there is evidently some concern from some white officers, I don't know how widespread, that they feel that they're being constrained by what they might see as political correctness of some sort. And I think that probably does need to be some kind of reckoning, but I think it needs to be done in a way that's not inflammatory, but is actually about trying to build trust and relations between different communities.
Charlie, last word to you.
Well, I should say tonight that Toby Young, director of the Free Speech Union, has intervened in this case, offered his support to Rick Pryor. He said that he's merely expressed a point of view shared by the people he's there to represent. He said it's completely absurd that this suspension has happened. I should say, just on the point about whether or not there are enough examples here, this evening I've given you a couple. I've given you one egregious case in your language, potentially egregious. Rick and I spoke about several others. And with regards to whether other criminals feel like this, I certainly speak to more criminals than just that one gun runner who today said he agreed with Rick, and there is a widespread assessment that organised criminal gangs across the country, not just in London, are adopting their tactics because they recognise that on stop and search in particular, and when it comes to weapons and drugs, that's a real area, they know they can reduce the risk of detection through this strategy. That's just the testimony, compelling testimony I've heard from several organised criminal gangs. OK, our viewers at home are getting involved with this. Barbara said, I'd say it's incumbent on the bosses to prove that Rick Pryor is wrong. It's not for him to provide further evidence. Jan has said, as a retired police officer, I can say that Rick Pryor is 100% correct. A lot of you are supporting that. Thank you, Charlie Peters. Wonderful.